This is part 17 of our series on the first chapter of Sanhedrin. We are going to be on pages 8a and 8b in Sanhedrin this evening. And I'm going to share my screen, but if somebody is listening to or watching this at some point in the future, they are welcome to contact me for a copy of the text at deborahklapper@gmail.com. There we go. Okay. All right, so tonight we are going back to the Mishnah to quote Tashlumei Kefel about the double payments that you pay if you're a thief. And then we are going to go back again. That will be relatively straightforward. And then we're going to go back again and quote the next bit of the Mishnah. That will be extremely complicated. We will not come close to finishing it tonight. I don't know if we'll come close to finishing it next time. But hopefully we'll understand what we have here tonight. Okay, so we start Tashlumei Kefel. The Mishnah said that it had a list of kinds of payments that for which you need a court of 3 judges. One of them is Tashlumei Kefel, which is the double payment that a thief pays if they're caught. So Shalach le Rav Nachman bar Rav Chisda le Rav Nachman bar Yaakov. Rav Nachman bar Rav Chisda sent a question to Rav Nachman bar Yaakov. Yilamedenu Rabbeinu dinei knasot bekama. He said, Master, please teach us how many judges do you need in order to rule dinei knasot, laws of fines? In other words, if you have a criminal financial case in which somebody might end up having to pay a fine, how many judges do you need to rule on that case? For our purposes tonight, we're going to define a knas or a fine as any payment which is not exactly the same amount as the actual damages. So paying double the actual damages would certainly, at least half of it, is going to qualify as a knas. But the Gemara is confused by this question that Rav Nachman bar Rav Chisda asked. What's he asking? Because he can't be asking what he sounds like he's asking. Because the Mishnah says that these cases of the double payment and the payment of 4, the payment of 5, all of those are judged by a court of 3. So it would be bizarre if Rav Nachman bar Rav Chisda were just asking Rav Nachman bar Yaakov to repeat a line in the Mishnah. It has to be something more interesting and more complicated than that. Ella yachid mumcheh. Now, rather, what he's asking is, if I have one individual who is an expert in some kinds of cases, and I think we saw this a bunch of weeks ago, in some kinds of cases, you can have an individual judge who's an expert judge instead of a panel of 3. So he's asking whether that would work here. Da'in dinei knasot olo. Can this individual expert judge cases of fines or not? Amar le tini tuha. And so the answer is, you already learned it. Tashlumei kefel v'tashlumei arba v'chamisha b'shlosha. So this is the quote from our Mishnah. The double payments and the payments of 4 and 5 are judged by 3. Mai shlosha, 3 what?
Deborah, I'm sorry, but you have already learned it. Is he now going into the details of what we have already learned?
Yes, and I think he's speaking specifically to Rav Nachman bar Rav Chisda, and he's saying, you learned this. It sounds like he may even be his teacher, right? Like, remember we did this last semester, and okay. Now he's going to reteach that little bit of text interpretation that he already taught him previously. Okay. I think that's what's happening. Okay, so when the Mishnah said that double payments or quadruple or quintuple payments need to be judged by 3 judges, 3 of what? 3 what kind of judge? So if you want to read the Mishnah as saying that those things are judged by 3 lay people, 3 non-experts, and for our purposes here, we are dividing the universe into experts and non-experts. And yes, I'm perfectly aware that there are gradations, but the Mishnah is not interested in that. The Gemara is not interested in that. So we're going to pretend that it's a expertness is a binary state here. If we say that it's talking about 3 non-experts, then we have a problem. Ha amar avuha de avuch, but your father's father said, Mishmei de Rav, in the name of Rav, afilu asara v'hein hedyotot sulin l'dinei knesset. That even if there are 10, if they're lay people, they're not valid to judge cases of fines. And again, this saying your father's father said this. It sounds like these guys have a personal relationship. This doesn't sound like it's sending a letter to an anonymous rabbi who doesn't know who you are. Rather, he says it must be that the 3 the Mishnah is talking about, since 3 lay people aren't allowed to judge cases of fines, so the Mishnah can't be talking about 3 lay people when it says that's who judges fines. So it must mean that it's talking about 3 experts. So if you need 3 experts in the Mishnah, that means that you can't have fewer than 3 experts. So the 1 expert is not going to work for this case. Okay, that was relatively straightforward. Now we get to the complicated part of this evening. The Mishnah said that a machloka between Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim. Rabbi Meir's position is not quoted here. They only quote the Chachamim, but we're going to need both. So I'll remind you that Rabbi Meir said that a motzi shem ra, and we'll talk about who that is in a second, is judged by a court of 3. V'chachamim omrim motzi shem ra be'esrim u'shlosha. The Chachamim say, and I'm gonna use sages to translate Chachamim when it says Chachamim, and when the Gemara describes the same people as Rabbanan, I'm going to translate that as rabbis, but it's the same group of people, just the Mishnah calls them Chachamim and the Gemara calls them Rabbanan. In any case, they say that a Motzi Shem Ra is judged by a court of 23. Now, a little bit of review here. First of all, a Motzi Shem Ra, or I translated it defamer for lack of a better translation. But a Motzi Shem Ra is a man who, the morning after his wedding, appears in court and complains that his bride turned out not to be the virgin that she claims to be. Now, there are 3 possible outcomes of this legally. At least there are 3 possible outcomes in which someone gets punished. There's also the possibility in which the court could, just dismiss the case, but we're going to ignore that for a moment. There are 3 possible outcomes in which someone gets punished. And one of them is in which the guy is proved to have lied, in which case the Torah says that he has to pay a fine because he was Motzi Shem Ra. He brought out a bad name about somebody. He defamed her. So because the Torah describes him that way in that outcome, so that's what we call him, regardless of what the outcome is. In that case, if it turns out that the husband lied, then he's proved to have lied, then he owes 100 zuz to the bride's father, either because the world is a paternal place, or because her money is a lot safer with her father than it would be with this slime ball she seems to have married. The next possible outcome is if she simply lied about being a virgin. She was never a virgin even before they did Kiddushin, then she is just downgraded to the level of person who gets married when they were married already, supposing he wants to stay married, when they were already not a virgin, supposing he wants to stay married to her, she loses her ketubah gets downgraded from 200 zuz to 100 zuz. And yes, it is confusing that the 2 financial amounts here are both 100 zuz, but they're not the same 100 zuz. The third possibility is that she was a virgin at the time when they did Kiddushin, but then she committed adultery with somebody else before she slept with her husband. Now, for our purposes here, it's important to remind you that in the time of the Mishnah, and for a significant portion of the time of the Gemara, at least, maybe longer than that, Kiddushin and Nisu'in, which is the next stage of marriage, are separated by 6 to 12 months, in which the couple is married in the sense that it's adultery if she sleeps with anybody else, but not in any other sense. He doesn't have to support her. They don't live together. He's not allowed to sleep with her. She lives in her parents' house and spends this time putting together her trousseau, and he lives at home and presumably spends this time trying to earn some money so he can support his wife. And then they actually move in together at the next stage at Nisuin. And that leaves this very uncomfortable gap in which bad things can happen, which is why we now do Kiddushin and we do Nisuin about 10 minutes later, with both the bride and the groom standing in front of the entire community during the entire interlude, so that there's no possibility of anyone doing anything untoward. But we're operating here in the old system. There is one more thing that I should mention before we go on, which is that the difference between a court of 3 and a court of 23 is that courts of 3, for the most part, judge things that have to do with money, and courts of 23, for the most part, judge things that have to do with killing people. And the punishment for adultery is death. So, okay, coming back to this. So remember, there's a case having something to do with Imotzi Shemra, in which Rabbi Meir says you use a court of 3, and the Chachamim say you use a court of 23. We're going to be spending the rest of this evening trying to figure out what that case is, and what it is that Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim are really disagreeing about. Okay, because in the Mishnah said the reason why the Chachamim want a court of 23 is because there's a possibility that it will be a capital case. So the Gemara says, "V'chi yesh bo dinei nefashot, mai have." And if it is a capital case, who cares? Why? The suggestion here seems to be that if it's starting out as a financial case, then why not just start with 3 and you need another 20 judges? You'll get another 20 judges. We'll worry about that later. That seems to be the Gemara's starting point. And we're going to have 3 answers to that question, which is to say why we can't just start with 3 and then add more later. First one belongs to a guy named Amar Ula. Bechoshishin l'laz knefli. Ula says they're disagreeing about the question of whether we're worried about something called laz. Laz here seems to be rumors, talking about stuff. And the case, according to Ula, seems to be this. The man wakes up the morning after the wedding, and he thinks that the woman has probably committed adultery on him. He thinks she probably was a virgin at the time when they got married, and she does not seem to be now. But he has no witnesses. So his plan is he's going to go to court, and he's going to say, this woman who I married is not a virgin. Make an announcement and see if anyone knows anything about this. And then he's hoping that a couple of kosher witnesses will pop up out of the woodwork and say, well, it happens that we watched your wife commit adultery and we warned her. And she said, yes, I don't care. I know they're going to kill me. And then the court will put his bride to death. And the question is, how plausible do we find it that if the husband has no evidence at the time when he makes the accusation, that witnesses will appear out of the woodwork because he's made a public accusation, right? That's what we mean by a rumor. And in that case, Rabbi Meir Savar ein choshishin l'laz. Rabbi Meir says we're not worried about rumors. At the moment, the man has no evidence of anything except his own experience. And the best he can do with that is to lower the amount of her ketubah or invalidate the marriage, and incidentally also stick his neck out so that his father-in-law can sue him, which we'll get back to later. And Rabbi Meir says, doesn't seem to be very likely that witnesses to adultery are going to appear out of nowhere. So if that happens, we'll deal with it. But in the meantime, this is a financial case. As opposed to the rabbis, the Rabbanan Savri, Choshishin Lalaz. And the rabbis say, no, we are concerned about a rumor, either because they think it's more likely that witnesses will appear than Rabbi Meir does, or because they just think that it's more of a problem if you switch venues in the middle of the case. And so even if it's a very small likelihood, they still want to be prepared for it. I don't know which of those it is. Okay, so that's Ula He thinks the question is, is it plausible to believe that witnesses to adultery, making this a capital case, will appear after the case starts?
And there's no concern, yeah, Deborah, there's no concern at all that an announcement is like almost an invitation to people, that once you come out and announce it, that it's possible that people who hate the bride will come out against her or something. Like, there seems to be no concern at all. If there were valid witnesses, they would have stepped up, but it's like you're leading the witness here.
So I would say two things. One is, yeah, that's why the father-in-law can countersue, because this is in fact a dastardly behavior, and the fact that it's happening in court and that the court has to respond to it somehow doesn't change the fact that the bridegroom is being a jerk.
Right.
And he's hoping, the woman he was so happy to marry yesterday, he's hoping she'll die today. Like, that's really the level this marriage has sunk to in less than 24 hours. So if I were the father-in-law, I would certainly be suing. But thank God I have the most wonderful sons-in-law in the universe. They would never consider behaving like this. I did not mean it that way. Sorry.
No,
I need to stop using myself as an example. In any case, the other thing I would say, though, is that because of what it takes to actually convict somebody of a capital crime, it would take a really intricate conspiracy. I don't think you couldn't do it on the spur of the moment, because you'd have to be able to, the witnesses would have to be able to stand up separate questioning, in which in which they're asked questions. I mean, they're asked questions about the crime itself, but they're also asked incidental questions like, what color was the paint in the room that you were standing in? Or the Gemara's example is, what color were the figs on the tree over where the people were, whatever. And in those questions, they don't have to answer. They could just say, I don't know. But if they do answer and their answers are different, the case is thrown out.
Right.
So you'd have to really work on setting somebody up for a capital crime. It wouldn't be easy. Of course, you have to really work on getting a legitimate case for a capital crime too, because as I already mentioned, and we'll get more into this more later, you cannot put somebody to death unless they volunteered for it, basically. Right? Because it wouldn't be fair to put someone to death unless you knew that they did something wrong on purpose. We don't put people to death for doing things wrong by mistake or because they were misinformed. So in order to prevent that, the witnesses have to interview the criminal right before the crime, and saying, do you know that this pasuk says you're not allowed to do what you're about to do? Oh, yes, I know about the pasuk. Do you know that the punishment for what you're about to do is death? Yes, I know that the punishment is death. Do you know that the court is going to kill you? Yes, I know the court is going to kill me. That's why I'm doing it. And then they commit the crime. Right? So, like, it's virtually impossible to build even a legitimate case with legitimate witnesses. I guess in that sense, it's easier with lying witnesses because you don't actually have to it doesn't actually have to have happened. You just have to say the right thing. But I would say the chances of anyone actually dying here are basically zero. The only question is what kind of trial we're going to have before we don't kill anybody. But okay, so that's Ula. Ula thinks that Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim are differing about the likelihood that this will turn into a capital case by witnesses appearing because they heard a rumor. Rava Amar. Rava, on the other hand, said, Kule alma lalaz lo cheshina. Rava says nobody thinks that a rumor is going to get witnesses to show up. That's not a thing. Everybody agrees that's not going to happen. But here what we're worried about is the honor of the first court if we change courts in the middle. Okay, and in order for that to make sense, we have to be talking about a very specific case. So, and this is the case. Kigon de ichnif be estrin vitzilta, lemedan dine nefashot. So for example, suppose that a court of 23 is convened to judge an adultery case as a capital case. But then the court was disbanded because there weren't witnesses that were adequate. They interviewed the witnesses didn't really see what they said, whatever it is. The criminal case is over. And the husband stops the judges on the way out and says, Amar lahu, dainu li miha dine mamona. He says, will you at least judge the financial case for me, since I lost the criminal case? And so in that case, at that point, Rabbi Meir says, it's a financial case, judge it with 3. And the Chachamim say, well, it's a financial case, but these 23 judges have already heard most of the relevant testimony, and it would be kind of an insult to them to send them home and start the case over again with a different set of judges. So let's make the first 23 judges sit back down again and make them hear the case, even though it's not their kind of case, because they were already judging the case when it started. Okay, so in Rava's version, the dispute in the Mishnah is about a case that had already started with a court of 23, and the question is whether you keep the court of 23 when it gets cut back down to just being a financial case. Okay, Meiti. So the Gemara suggests a challenge to Ula. It'll make it explicit that it's to Ula in a second, based on a fragment of a Breita, which we do not have the whole Breita, but they seem to be pretty sure they know what it's talking about. And here is the Breita. V'chachamim omrim, tiva'o mamon bishlosha. The sages say, if he sued him for money, that's with 3. Tiva'o nefashot be'esrim v'shlosha. If he sued him for a capital crime, that's with 23. Yes, I know that the genders of the pronouns don't work out properly, and it's a problem. And
well, but if who sued who?
That's right. So we're clearly taking it here to be about the either the husband suing the wife or the wife suing the husband. Certainly, the capital case has to be the husband suing the wife. She has to be the defendant. She's the only person here who's in jeopardy of a capital case.
Well, but
yeah.
Sorry, no, it just occurred to me that maybe, as you said before, maybe it's the father of the bride suing the husband.
Good. So for the financial case, it could be. But for the capital case, which also says tiva'o, he sued him. For that case, the only possible capital defendant in our case is a woman, which suggests to me that this Breita fragment is actually lifted out of a discussion of a different crime,
something
and
else,
also relevant to our case.
Yeah,
I don't think our case is the original context of this, but it seems very clear that the Gemara thinks it also applies to our case. Okay, but that's why the pronouns in the English don't match, but they do match the Hebrew, even if they don't match our case. Okay, in any case, now the Gemara explains why that's a problem. Well, why it's not a problem for Rava, and then we'll say that it is a problem for you. So Bishlam ala Rava. Rava does not have a problem, because in Rava's case, Tiva'o mamon tchila bishlosha, if he sued her at the beginning for money, then that would be with 3 judges. And if, on the other hand, tiva'o nefashot tchila, afilu mamon b'esrim bishlosha. But if he sued her for trying to get her killed at the beginning, then even the financial case that results will be with 23. Now, it's important that Rava has to be, everybody, in fact, has to be able to make this position of the Chachamim coherent with the position of the Chachamim in our Mishnah. Right, so our Mishnah said, whatever case it is we're talking about, the Chachamim say judge with 23. So Rava thinks that case is a case where it started out as being a capital case and then got downgraded to a financial case. So he looks at this and he says, well, if it starts as a capital case, it's with 23. That's exactly what I said the Chachamim say. So Rava does not have a problem with this Breita. Ula, on the other hand, thinks the case in our Mishnah is a case in which the case starts out as a financial case with no hope at that moment of it being a capital case. And the Chachamim think you need to make it a court of 23 anyway, because witnesses might appear even though you don't know of it. He does not have a way of reading this fragment from the Chachamim saying that if it starts as a financial case, it's 3, and if it starts as a capital case, it's 23. So Ella Ula Kasha. Ula has a problem with this Breita. But it's all about the personal relationships in this evening's Gemara. Amar Rava, ani ve'arisha b'chabura targamina. Rava says, I and the lion in the group, who we're going to define in a second, is Rav Chia bar Avin, we explained this Breita for Ula. Right? Rava says, I know that I'm in a dispute with Ula, but I'm going to defend the Ula's position is also coherent. I don't agree with it, but it's coherent. Umanu, and who is the lion? Rav Chia bar Avin. So Rav Chia bar Avin and Rava explain as follows. Here is the case that Ula can believe that the Mishnah and this Breita fragment are both talking about. Shehevia bal edim shezinta. The husband brought witnesses to the adultery, and he's got 2 witnesses that claim that they warned her and she accepted responsibility, and then they watched her commit adultery. Exactly what they would have to watch is not clear. There's a Mishnah in Makot in which, in fact, some rabbis accuse each other of being absurd because you can't possibly watch adultery. Whatever it is that your standard is for what it means to witness adultery, they did it. And then the father brought witnesses who disqualified the husband's witnesses and made them edim zomim. Now, edim zomim are a very specific kind of disqualified witnesses. They are disqualified witnesses who get disqualified because new witnesses come and say that the first set of witnesses could not have been in the place they claim to have been at the time of the crime because they were somewhere else with the new witnesses. Right? So witnesses A and B claim to have been in Sharon, Massachusetts, watching the adultery at 10 o'clock in the morning on Monday. And witnesses C and D say you couldn't possibly have been in Sharon at 10 o'clock on Monday because at 10 o'clock on Monday, you were having a lunch meeting with me in Brookline. Okay, now you'll notice that there's no particular reason to believe the second set of witnesses more than the first set. But the law is, and it's probably a gzerat hakatuv, it's probably just an arbitrary rule that God said you have to follow, that we always believe the last set of witnesses. So if witnesses C and D disqualify witnesses A and B, then she's innocent. Now, if witnesses E and F show up and say, you couldn't have seen witnesses A and B at a lunch meeting in Brookline at 10 o'clock in the morning on Monday, because you were with us in Foxborough buying shoes, then now all of a sudden we don't believe witnesses C and D, so we believe witnesses A and B. Okay, and this can iterate to as many pairs of witnesses as you want, up until we actually start putting people to death for their crimes, at which point we stop accepting witnesses. And the thing with an edim zomimim, unlike most witnesses who are either proved to be lying or just invalidated, edim zomimim receive the punishment that would have gone to the person who was being tried if they had lost the trial. So edim zomimim to an adultery case are going to be killed. So when witnesses C and D show up and make A and B into edim zomimim, we would kill A and B, unless E and F show up before that, in which case we'll kill C and D and the bride. So There's a distinct arbitrariness to this, but as I said, it's the way it is. Okay, in any case, so the husband started out trying to get.
I have a question about that there.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, A and B, if A and B are lying, they are accusing someone of a capital crime. But if
Correct.
C and D are lying, they are not accusing someone of a capital crime. They are saying
Not
the capital
true.
crime hadn't happened.
Well, that's true. They're saying that the bride didn't commit adultery, but they're saying that A and B are trying to kill her.
Okay, because A and B, okay, I see. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, so however many times you iterate, we're going to kill either all of the odd numbered people or all of the even numbered people. Until, as I said, once we actually start putting people to death, we stop accepting witnesses, and the case is just stopped. Okay, in any case, so our case here that's going to work for Ula is that the husband originally brought her to court on an adultery charge with witnesses in a court of 23. The father brought witnesses who disqualified or made into Edim Zomimim, the adultery witnesses. So now the husband can't get her on the adultery charge. He doesn't have witnesses anymore. So instead, Mamon mi Baal Bishlosha. So now at this point, the father sues the husband because he brought false witnesses. You'd think he'd be suing the husband because the husband was trying to kill his daughter. Seems to me like a pretty good reason to sue somebody. But in this case, he's actually suing him for defaming her as a non-virgin or as an adulteress, whatever, in the original case. And the father sues him for the 100 zuz that the father is entitled to if the husband made a false accusation. Okay, so in that case, then it is judged with 3 judges. On the other hand, but at the same time, we have another case happening in parallel, which is the case in which witnesses C and D are testifying about witnesses A and B, and then we're killing witnesses A and B. That's a capital case. That one needs to be judged by 23. And so now Ula can say, well, yeah, the Chachamim say 23 in the Mishnah, and they say 3 in the Breita, but that's because they're 2 separate cases. They're saying 23 about the capital case, and they're saying 3 about the financial case. So I don't have a contradiction between the Breita and the Mishnah because they're talking about these 2 separate cases, which both originated from this one original case, but they're now separate cases. Okay, Abaye has another idea how to interpret the original piece from the Mishnah. What it is that Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim are disagreeing about when Rabbi Meir says judge it with 3 and the Chachamim say judge it with 20. Abaye Amar, Dukule Alma Chayshinan Lulaz. Abaye says, unlike Rava, remember, said nobody's worried about rumors. Abaye says everybody's worried about rumors. Umishum Kvodan Shel Rishonim. And they're arguing about whether there's an insult to the first set of judges if we change venues in the middle. And this is the case. You go into Atru Beis Bastam. If the witnesses warned her generically, they warned her that she might be killed, but they didn't tell her that she's going to get, I think it's skila that she's going to get as her death penalty. So there are 4 death penalties: skila, sreifa, hereg, and chanek. Skila is usually translated as stoning, but it mostly amounts to pushing somebody off of a roof that's about, 10 feet high, and then dropping rocks on them until they die. When I was in my first ever Gemara shir that I attended as a middle schooler, the Magid shir there, explained that the goal is to have the person end up dead without having them end up as the texture of mashed potatoes. That has stuck in my head for the last 40 years. In any case, that's skila. Sreifa is usually translated as burning, but involves pouring molten lead down somebody's throat. Hereg is beheading, which is exactly what it sounds like. And chenek is strangling, which is more or less exactly what it sounds like. In any case, so these witnesses only said, you're going to die. They didn't say how you're going to die. V'hai Tana hu detanya, and this, the person teaching our Mishnah, the anonymous voice of our Mishnah, is the same as this Tana here in this Braita, who said, Vishar kol chayve mitot shebatorah, the other capital crimes in the Torah, other than this is quoted from a context in which they were talking about a person who incites to idolatry and a person who tries to convince other people to worship idols. That person, we have much lower standards of evidence in killing them than we do normally. But so they were discussing that, and now they're going back to the standards of evidence for all of the other capital cases in the Torah. So all of the other capital criminals in the Torah, ein mitinotan ela be'eda ve'edim v'hatra'ah. You can't kill them without a court of 23 and witnesses and a warning, a hatra'ah. Ve'ad sheyodi'uhu shehu chayav mita bebeitin, and it only works if they notify him that he's going to be liable to death by the court, meaning like not God is going to kill you, not you're going to die, but people in this court after witnesses testify are going to kill you. Rabbi Yehuda Omer ad sheyodi'uhu be'eza mitahu nerag. Rabbi Yehuda says actually it only works if they say which death penalty he's going to be killed with. So Abaye is saying that the case in our Mishnah, there were witnesses, and we are starting and we are going to try the case. There are witnesses to adultery, and we can't use the witnesses that we actually have because they didn't warn her properly. We seem to be ruling like Rabbi Yehuda here. And the question is, we think it's very likely that more witnesses will appear once we publicize this thing. And the only question is, if we start out with a court of 3 and then we upgrade to a court of 23, is that an insult to the first court? And Rabbi Meir says, doesn't bother me, we'll just add more judges if we need them. And the Chachamim say, no, if there's a chance that we might need 23, we're going to start with 23. Okay, there are a number of other ways to read this, and we will see them next time. But that's enough to mull over for the evening. Yeah, so those 3 positions, Ula and Rava and Abaye, are what we have for tonight. Notice that they're all manipulating the same variables. Ula says we're worried about, well, some people are worried about rumors, other people aren't. Rava says, well, no, nobody's worried about rumors, but we're worried about whether the court will be insulted if we dismiss them. And Abaye says, well, no, everybody's worried about rumors, and we're worried about whether the court will be insulted if we dismiss them. So everybody's playing with the same 2 variables. Are courts unhappy if they get replaced in the middle, and do witnesses appear out of nowhere just because you announce that you want to have a court case? And that so far we've got 3 different permutations of those those options. Okay, are there questions?
Do cases of monetary cases also require witnesses?
Yes, but not the same way. Most monetary cases require witnesses to, for example, yes, I saw that Mindy lent Deborah money. So now, Deborah has to pay back, unless I can bring my own witnesses that saw me pay you back. Right. And then we can have, a battle of the witnesses. So witnesses in that sense, yes. Witnesses that with like this one key moment at which you warn somebody and make sure that they're conscious of what's going on, much less so. And in financial cases, the witnesses are frequently in written form as a contract. Whereas the witnesses for a criminal case have to always be in person. The other criminal cases require witnesses with warning, though. If we're going to flog somebody, that also requires the same kind of criminal intent.
So with any physical punishment?
Yeah. Financial fines do not, though, mostly because most of the fines that you can be charged you'd be responsible to pay them even if you didn't do whatever it is on purpose.
Right. So witnesses for a capital case not only testify that they saw the event in question being committed, but that they also warned the defendant. Whereas witnesses in a monetary case only testify that, well, the person paid that already or something like that.
Yes, or you can testify that you saw somebody break something that belongs to somebody else.
Right.
And then they don't have to have warned, they don't have to interact with the person at all because intent is irrelevant. If I break your stuff by mistake, I still have to pay for it.
Right. Got it. Okay.
The other thing that does get imported, though, generally, is that anytime anyone testifies to something, we do make them give a time and a date. Because it is generally speaking, we don't accept any testimony that wouldn't be possible to demonstrate that the judges were somewhere else at the time. I said the witnesses were somewhere else at the time. So Hazama, the idea of making the witnesses into Adim Zomanim does import. If my witnesses say that they saw you, I don't know, break my window with a baseball bat at 10 o'clock in the morning on Monday, and then you bring witnesses that those witnesses were somewhere else, you're going to get off the hook. And we will probably make my witnesses pay the money because they tried to make you pay money. And if I brought witnesses to begin with who couldn't tell you what day it happened, I don't think we'd accept them because it wouldn't be possible to disprove them.
And all witnesses have to make a shvua?
No, generally speaking, witnesses don't swear to anything. Swearing is reserved for litigants, usually.
Okay.
Usually the reason that we make somebody swear is because we don't have adequate witnesses and we need to get someone to stop lying. And for some reason, we think people are less likely to lie while holding a Sefer Torah than they are not holding a Sefer Torah. And the truth is the American court system also seems to believe that this to be the case. Not really sure why it should be the case, but apparently that's part of human psychology. So if we have, for example, if you say that I owe you $100 because you lent it to me, and I say, yes, you lent me money, but you only lent me $50, then we think probably I actually borrowed the $100 and I'm just trying to buy time because I don't have the money to pay you back, and I'm admitting to a smaller amount so I won't like insult you to your face and hoping to be able to pay you the full thing later and telling myself it's not really stealing. And when they make me swear about the other $50, then if I'm lying, I'll stop lying. So
Mhm.
that would be a case in which we do in fact make the litigant swear.
Right, right. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else? Okay. I am, as I noted in the email that I sent earlier today, I'm planning to take off next week and the week after. And then we will come back in January recharged and ready to figure out the rest of this Motzi Shamrock case, which we're not close to done.
Be safe.
Thank you. You too.
Yeah. When we come back, Deborah, can you start off by just reviewing this? 'Cause I'll try to review in between, but I think it would just help.
Yeah, no, and I think that at least for me, I understand things better the second or third time that I
Yeah.
hear them. So
Yeah, me too. Me too. Thanks
Okay.
a lot.
Thank you.
Enjoy the
I will-
break.
Thank you very much. I'll see you in a few weeks.
Okay. Bye.
Bye. Bye.